Thank you, dear Roger. So, welcome to our session with Roger Atkins. I'm looking forward. We met 2 years ago on the IAA, had some fun, deepened this experience, and we know each other through LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn is your home, your office.
Yes, it is.
I learned a lot about this, and Roger, this is now serious stuff. You know, it's university, Switzerland. So I'm really looking forward to, to chat and to get some of your ideas. To start off, I was told we talk about our common Audi experience, but I took some time, and there's even more than the Audi experience. You started as a musician.
I did.
Why?
Yes, indeed.
Come on.
Indeed.
Open up, please tell us.
Okay. Yeah. So do you want me to go through the whole thing now, or just have a chat?
I thought, my first idea was really to pick you up with the corporate experience. This we share, both in common.
Yeah.
But before that, you musician, you were in the publishing business. You worked for Scandinavian brands like Volvo, Saab. And my interest was not myself introducing you, but take us through the journey where you started, and maybe ending today, what's your mission and why? And how topic mobility was really this red line after you quit as a musician. Why is this now your mission?
Okay, right. Well, very quickly then. I did start as a musician. I loved what I did. I mostly sang on my own. I called myself Me, which used to get very confusing, because if I rang up a venue to get a booking, I tried to do everything myself. And they said, well, you know, who is it calling? I said, it's me. And they'd say, well, yeah, but what's your name? And I'd say, well, I'm Me. Can I speak to Nigel, the manager? He knows who I am. And people went, well, who are you? I'm Me. So it seemed like a good idea at the time, but it didn't always work out. But I love being a musician. I tried it for a few years. The truth was, I was okay at the music bit, but I was terrible at the business bit. What I didn't understand was it was the music business, and the business is the big part of it. I thought it was the music part. And therefore, in trying to look after myself, didn't have an agent, didn't have a manager, it didn't work out. I wasn't successful, and I failed at it. And that was around my mid-20s. And to be really honest, for the next 30 years, I wasn't any good at anything else. I was average. I was an average salesman. I used to sell advertising space. I was average. I was a car salesman for Saab. I was okay, but I was average. And the truth is, until I was 55, 30 years on from being a musician, did I find something that I was good at. And what I'm good at, I hope for others to judge, is communication, is telling stories, is living as good as on LinkedIn. And I suppose I'm drawing from that past, that musical past of being able to try and tell a story, sing a song, if you like, put another word to it, and give people a flavor of things in hopefully an interesting way, not just say this is happening, that's happening, something else. Try and join it together, join up the dots, make it like a song, give it a melody, give it a tune, give it a rhythm. And I kind of have that in my mind when I write about things, as I now do and have done, as my own business for the nearly 10 years, well, 9 years, but, it'll be 10 years next year. And that's because, it's taken me till my mid-50s to find out what I'm good at. All the stuff before that, you're right, it's been automotive, in beginning as a car salesman in the mid-1980s for Saab, and then working for Volvo, and then working for Volkswagen and Audi, and then working for Richard Branson, selling cars on the internet in 2000, which, what's that, 23 years ago. That the ambition there was to not have dealers, not have handlers, a German word, but to sell vehicles direct 23 years ago. So yeah, it's been a journey.
Part of your journey was with Audi. You were called the experience manager, which was quite avant-garde at that time. The title was Grand Champion UK and Ireland. I stole this title. I'm now Brand Guardian. How did this relationship to cars change? I know now you drive a ID bus.
Yeah.
How did it personally for yourself, really on the personal level? You know, you just can sell cars if you're a car maniac and you love cars. How did this reflect your career now, also being independent?
Well, it's a very different thing when you buy your own car. When you have to fund your own vehicle, you think a lot more about it. I think a big issue that we've got in the auto industry, whether it's in Germany, France, UK, America, wherever, is if you are in a position of authority, decision-making, etc., you're a manager, in other words, you're cocooned. You don't live in the real world of how much a car costs, how much it costs to insure it, how much it costs to put fuel in it. You're protected from that. You don't see it because you have a company car and all the things that go with that. And so moving away from that sort of world, and the last time I worked for a company was Ricardo, engineering consultancy company. And I got a car and all the other things that go with these things. But when you reflect on how much a car really costs, when you add in all of the different parts, insurance, the cost, the depreciation, so on and so forth, you realize that this is arguably almost as expensive as your home, as your mortgage, as your rent. But it doesn't seem like that. And the craziness of it is you're paying all this money for something that you only use a fraction of the time, 5–10% of the time. And it makes you start to think, surely there's a better way. Can there be a better way? It's been 130 years of the internal combustion engine invented. It's been 100 years of people buying and owning cars or acquiring cars, company cars, leasing cars, whatever. And we've never challenged it. We've never questioned it because that works. And it does work. But I think as more people live in cities, particularly urban living, all of those things, you need to start thinking, well, this can't carry on. And I suppose another moment, Hans-Peter, was going to China about 10 years ago. No, it's more than that. Let me think. 15 years ago must have been. But looking how many cars there were in China, when you go to Shanghai or go to Beijing, you see an enormous number of cars. Yet they are only a fraction of car ownership per thousand of the population as we have in Germany, or we have in the UK, or we have in America. In the Western world, most of the countries I just mentioned and others, it's something like 800, 850 cars per thousand of the population. So a lot of families have two cars. Of course they do. But, arguably, almost everyone has a car. Whereas in China, I think at the moment it's about 180 per thousand of the population. A country like India, it's even less. It's 22. So when you look around the world and look at how the world works, it can work. It does work without car ownership. And I think, that journey of cost, certainly the realization of how much things cost, and observing many things firsthand, and having access to data and looking at the development of technology like autonomous vehicles, business models like shared programs. And as I've said many times before, a lot of change, a lot of progress, a lot of things that develop don't work for a while. They fail to begin with. I know that. I worked with Richard Branson. That failed. He was selling cars on the internet. I worked at Modec with an electric truck, in 2007. That failed. So sometimes it's the right idea, but wrongly executed and at the wrong time. And actually, I'll quote a German economist called Rudiger Dornbusch. And Rudiger Dornbusch said, things take longer to change than you thought they would. Then they change faster than you thought they ever could. And I think that explanation from an economist, some time ago, rings true very much for two big things. I think for the auto industry in progress to electric vehicles, and I think also climate change. And I think we're starting to see that. It's a bit like, well, climate change is going to take 10, 20, 30 years. It'll sort of be gradual, whatever. Or then people thinking, well, it's not really changing at all, is it? It's just, this has always happened. It's cyclical. It's nature. It's what happens. But the more we're now seeing this stuff happening, it's just like Rudiger Dornbusch said. Things are changing faster than we thought they ever could, and it's really quite scary. So yeah, that's a little bit of where I've got to the place I'm at right now.
I come back to that point, and the quotation makes me a little bit really thinking that maybe we're nearly quite that point where things change fast, because like the last 15 years we tried to slow down the necessary transformation, with hybrid, all these things. But one thing I would like to come back, I experienced somebody being very curious, meeting people, and really all kinds of people. Where did you take your inspiration to travel to China, or where are the places where you come back and you get inspired for your thoughts, for your work, for your mission?
Great question. I think it's to be like a child almost, always want to know why. When you've got little kids, your own children or grandchildren or nieces or nephews, that thing that we do when we're children, where we keep saying to our parents, we drive them crazy. Why? Keep asking the question why. Do it when you're an adult as well. Don't just accept things. Look for things that are interesting and different. And I think that's the journey I went on. I knew a little bit about China because my wife was a diplomat. My wife used to work for Margaret Thatcher in the 1980s, mid-1980s. And one of her big pieces of work was working in the department for the handover of Hong Kong to China. So she knew a bit about that. And that gave me a little awareness of things. And yeah, I was trying to understand, how has China got like this? What happened? And a story that perhaps many people don't know is that there were 18 farmers. This is a famous story. 18 farmers in China who just wouldn't accept anymore the way in which the communist policy worked in regard to agriculture and farming and food. And they decided to break all the rules, go against everything and say, this doesn't work. It's not good enough. We're going to do this. And the people in their village said to them, well, you're going to be arrested. You'll all disappear. You just have to accept it. Even if it's wrong, just do it. But they didn't. And at the same time, Deng Xiaoping, who became the father of modern China, he heard about this and he went to visit them. And they weren't sent to prison. They weren't punished. He actually listened to them and thought, you're right. You're right. You should question. You should challenge. You should say, what could be done differently? And that's kind of been the story of China, certainly for the last 30, 40 years, certainly the last 30 years. And it's very, very intriguing. So I wanted to go to China and understand this. And the first chance I got to do it was soon after I'd met the Chinese ambassador to London, Madame Fu Ying, at the end of 2010. I was at MODEC at the time. So this is 3 years into being at MODEC, in the midst of the financial meltdown. And I happened to go and meet the Chinese ambassador because my boss didn't want to meet her. So I did. I'll meet her. I'm interested. And she said to me, bring your company to China. We will help you progress in China. We are going to develop renewable energy and we're going to develop new energy vehicles. And I said, what do you mean new energy vehicles? She said, well, electric vehicles. That's what they called them. But this is 2010. So it wasn't until what, 5 years later? Yeah, 5 years, that we saw the Made in China 2025 industrial strategy, which should have woken the world up to what China had as a plan. It wasn't a sinister communist plot. It was about overtaking the West with the automotive industry. It couldn't do it by just making a slightly better internal combustion engine. You know, Germany, France, America, you know, the big established companies were always there. Euro 4, Euro 5, Euro 6, Euro 7, getting better all the time. And so fundamentally, the Chinese were never going to catch up doing that. So they had to leapfrog. This was their leapfrog idea. So I think there were 10 aspects of Made in China 2025. One of them was the development of electric vehicles. And what they also learned was how the Japanese had developed successfully the electronics industry in the 1970s, well, late 60s and 70s. And they learned from that the fundamental was energy storage. You had to have Sony Walkmans and all these other things. You had to have a battery. And that's where the original lithium-ion battery began its journey, if you like. And then the Chinese realized to have big electric vehicles, you need to have big batteries. And therefore that became, you know, a fundamental part of the journey that they went on. So none of this should be a surprise to Ursula von der Leyen or anybody else in government or in power that we are where we are. But if I can jump around a little bit, but come right up to date, a moment has occurred this week, which I maybe should have known a bit more about it before, if I'm supposed to be a storyteller, but I didn't. But I've just read it in detail now. The French government's approach to giving incentives, purchase incentives for EVs, is now going to be linked to a criteria of the carbon intensity of the manufacture of that vehicle. And for everything that's going on in Germany at the moment, the EU and in the UK and everywhere else, thinking, what are we going to do? The Chinese are coming. Oh my God. I think this move by the French is massively significant because it's doing two things. It's saying, on the one hand, if we're going to have electric vehicles, they've got to be better than combustion engine vehicles. Nothing to do with they haven't got tailpipe and all the rest of that. They've got to make a significant contribution to the reduction of CO2 and improve urban air quality. And if they don't, and we need to qualify that, then that's a big issue. And of course, this is going to be a huge problem, I think, for not just, well, possibly the German auto industry, as well as the Chinese auto industry, anybody then, because the French are looking for kind of protectionist policy. But one, like I said, it's two things. It's protectionism. Of course it is, to look after their industry. They don't want to see it, disappear. And the second thing, it's like first principle. If EVs are going to be the next way in which we go forward with mobility, they must be better, and very much better in terms of their production. All of the stuff in the battery, all of the stuff in the motor, the inverter, the power electronics, the whole bill of materials, and the production of it, and the transportation of the supply chains that go into making all of those component parts. So, sorry, I jumped around a little bit there, a bit from the past and then the present, but I felt it was relevant. And I am going to talk about Rubik's Cube in a bit, by the way.
One second. Just let us finish this journey, because, you are an inspirational thought leader, not just a storyteller, for many, many others. What were the 3 personal encounters which inspired you most? Like you mentioned Richard, we both met William, but what were the 3 personal ones where you got out and said you got yourself, for your company, Electric Vehicles Outlook, which is in the name is looking into the future, giving inspiration. What were 3 encounters you remember or stayed here?
Great question. I would say meeting Madame Fu Ying. I'd never met a diplomat before. Well, see, an ambassador. I hadn't met a senior ambassador like that before. And yeah, it was quite a moment. There is a backstory to it. I spoke a bit of Chinese. I was the only person that did in this big meeting room with people, and I got moved to sit in front of her. And that taught me sometimes you have to find a way of standing out. You know, we're all in competition with each other. We are in life. You know, it's life. And if you're on your own kind of thing, well, I suppose you could argue we're all on our own, but you look for ways in which you can stand out. So my attempt to stand out when I met the Chinese ambassador was by speaking some Chinese. I just said my name, you know, 你好, 我是 Roger Atkins. And I'd learned a little phrase that is about education delivers progress. And it's from Chairman Mao. And it was 好好谢谢天天生生. And I just knew that and a few other things. So meeting the Chinese ambassador, number one. Number two, definitely, and this obviously was earlier, meeting Richard Branson. Because when you meet someone that's very famous, you have a certain expectation. And when I met him, it wasn't that expectation at all. A couple of things to be personal. One, he was much smaller than I thought he would be. Second thing, second thing, he didn't talk much. He listened.
Yeah.
And then the other thing, which I have done ever since I worked in and around him, and I didn't work for him every day, wasn't there all the time. It was a company that licensed the Virgin name, and a guy called Ian Lancaster actually had set the company up, but Richard would come in. But the one thing I also noticed he had a notebook, and he was taking notes as people were talking. So he was listening, not talking, taking notes. And that had an impact on me. I thought, well, this guy's very successful. Maybe, you know, that's part of what you have to do a bit better. I've not learned to listen more. That I've failed miserably at. I still talk too much. But what I do definitely is, you know, I have notebooks and I take notes on when I'm out and about. So yeah, that was the second person. So Madame Fu Ying, Richard Branson, and then quite recently I met Mujib Ijaz, who is the founder of Our Next Energy, a company abbreviated to ONE. They're building innovative batteries using innovative chemistry, and I met him in Detroit earlier this year. Why did he stand out? Because of his humanity, his manner, his intellect. And I just sort of thought, you know, because I could have given you a few other names, but he's kind of jumped the queue. You know, it's like an ongoing process. You know, who are my top three? Well, they were this last week, but so he's now jumped into that top three. Yeah, he's a very impressive person, and I just like feeling inspired by being in the company of people, three of whom I've just mentioned, because it just wakes you up. It uplifts you. You suddenly then think, okay, I understand my life a bit more about, you know, where I'm going personally. Because the other thing that's nice about, say, Richard Branson, for example, well, all three of them, they've got families, they've got kids, they've managed to balance this thing of going on a journey, being successful, spending a lot of time at work, but they've still managed to sustain, you know, that close relationship, which, let's be honest, maybe for people listening here now, this is one of the hardest things you do in life, is to balance having a career, being successful at something, enjoying it, earning money, but at the same time maintaining that relationship with a life partner. For some people, it just, you know, it doesn't work. You can't do both, sadly. But I'm very lucky that I've been married nearly 40 years. And those three people I mentioned, I know they're that way inclined as well, as it happens. But that's not a prerequisite, because sometimes, look, it's just luck. You know, when people say, oh, do this, do that, this works, be like me, whatever, what they miss out often is you need a bit of luck along the way. And wherever luck comes from, I don't know, but some people have some bad luck. So I would like to just add that.
Cool. And maybe sometimes a second chance. Roger,
Yeah.
before we put this up, you already mentioned like this recent development in France, you know, with protectionism.
Yeah.
Especially like we are really focusing on Germany, Switzerland, Austria, you know, to really make it in front of our door and really create impact. And the German car industry did profit a lot the last 15, 20 years, beginning with Santana in China, you know, and now it's just getting some kind of equilibrium. And my question is, if you look now at the geopolitical situation evolving, how do you see the role of our home region, which is Switzerland, Germany, Austria, in this new game, you know, coming from a ICE-based industry and looking beyond the question whether it's electric or combustion, where do you see the strengths or where do you see the region?
That's a tricky question. Well, look, at the heart of this is engineering. Engineering change, engineering the way business models work, products work, services work, whatever. So I think the academic part of Germany, Austria, Switzerland, some of the great universities, the depth in which that journey that people have been on as individuals and also looking at the legacy of all of that is incredibly strong. This is one of the things the Chinese admire a lot about certain countries and locations is the academic depth, knowledge and experience. So I think it's to reflect on what we've got in that regard. As to how to move forward, I don't think necessarily we should just cut and paste what China has done and try and do it ourselves. I think sometimes if you feel like you're not going to win a race simply by running faster and trying to catch up, maybe you have to just stop and think for a moment. And just very quickly on that, the guy that invented this game, this quiz, the Rubik's Cube, he was a teacher and he wanted to give his students a lesson in life, actually, which was not just work out how to do the Rubik's Cube, it's work out how to solve a lot of problems. And a lot of what I think people do is panic. A lot of what people do with problems is they try to fix it too quickly rather than looking at it, thinking about it, you know, the essence, the basis of it, and then coming to a conclusion. So, you know, if you try to just do this with a Rubik's Cube, you're never going to do it because it's quintillion numbers of permutations to get all the colors to match up. But once you know the algorithm, and how do you know the algorithm? You know, by careful thinking, analysis, whatever. Some would say just go on Google and type in algorithm Rubik's Cube. That would work as well. But essentially, what I'm trying to say is, I think we have to see Germany, Austria, and Switzerland reinvent itself around what it's really good at. And it's great at academia, it's great at engineering, and it's great at problem solving. So I think it's a question now of looking to those things, but not panicking, but certainly getting on with things. And one of the things that, in regard to how you tackle problems, that definitely needs to change is this is a really tricky one. Culturally, the countries you're talking about are very hierarchical. They're very set as structures in terms of how management works. And if you look at the success of CATL or Tesla or some of the companies that we all know, partly why they're successful is because they're not structured in that rigid way that companies in where we're talking about. So we've got to try and way of pushing back on that hierarchy where I can't say anything because I'm not important enough. I better not say something because my manager won't like it. I think more than anything else, the change that we need to see in these countries, and it's going to be really difficult, is a cultural change. Engage with more young people. Don't just have a supervisory board full of 60, 70, 80-year-old people. What the hell is that going to give? Inject it with, you know, people in their 20s or 30s, not as a gesture, Don't, oh, let's get a woman, let's get a young person. No, get the right person, get a really smart person, and look for a blend of people, particularly age, on those boards of management of these companies to inspire and trigger innovative thinking and faster change of the right sort. So I think that's what we need. But we shouldn't despair because I've made my living out of the industry for nearly 40 years. I love the automotive industry, and I'm not also an EV zealot. I'm not like, oh, it's just EV, that's it. I hate combustion engines. I'm not that person at all. I love Formula One, for example. And just to kind of conclude, the one thing I don't believe will happen and shouldn't is mass adoption of electric vehicles. I've said this at a lecture I went to at Bath University. I think would be a big mistake. I think the transition to electric mass adoption wise will come from buses, taxis, vans and trucks, the things that cause most pollution in towns and cities. I think at the top end, you will see luxury and hypercars and all the rest of it remaining as possessions that people own. Then I think a big chunk in the middle that would equate to 30, 40 million vehicles made every year on the planet that have always been owned and not used much, that will all change. And I think it should. I think it needs to. So yeah, there's some very interesting things ahead, but yeah, that's kind of how I see it.
Thanks for sharing this personal view, Roger. I can feel in the audience you tipped some points for some questions. So anybody from around, just put up your mic, and Roger knows who you are, but maybe just say what you do, and we can open this up for an open Q&A session. Who is first?
Don't be shy.
Come on, don't be shy. I have enough questions. Please.
So, Natalia Turon, SEAT brand, Spain. So I'm
Hi, Natalie.
Hi, pleased to meet you. I have heard you are an ex-Volkswagen Group as a colleague, or Audi ex-colleague. Pleased to meet you. So I come from SEAT, in charge of the corporate and the sustainability strategy. And I would like just to ask, which will be your recommendation for us as for the OEMs for the future? So in our case, in case of the SEAT brand, you should recommend us something in our path also towards the transformation and for facing the future challenges and so on. And so which will be also your main recommendation?
I think in Europe, we've got to focus on supply chain. I think we've got to focus on supply chains and make them as local as possible. I think if I were running a big business, the people I would pay the most, the people I would look for the best talent would be the people in supply chain. Because if you take the bill of materials and sort of work backwards, if you sort of say, what is it we've got to make and at what price? At what price can we sell a lot of these or have a business model? And then work back from that. Work to the point where you then look at your bill of materials, you then look at the biggest top 3 cost items, you then look at how you can take those costs down, but in the right way, because there's been a lot of focus on cost down that's caused big problems. So I think that's got to be right. But I'm sorry to jump on a current thing, something that's just happened, Natalia. But I do think that this move by the French is really smart. It's really smart because I think it tackles the two things. It is protectionist. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with that. I'm protectionist of my family. Someone breaks into my house to try and do anything to my wife or I'm going to hurt them. I'm going to be protectionist. But the big difference is what I think the French government has done here. I think it truly is significant. They've said, let's just stop for a second here. I don't want to see an electric vehicle revolution if it's not that much better than combustion engine vehicles in regard to CO2. What's the point? We've all been lying to each other if that's the case. So in saying they're going to assess the carbon footprint of the component parts of it, this is the way to go. So if you're in that arena, then I think this is really good news. It's not going to be easy. It's going to cause a huge backlash from the Chinese and the Koreans and everybody else. And well, quite frankly, France is your neighbour, it's our neighbour too. But as to how this is going to work in practice, we'll see. But I do like it. I do think it's the right thing to do. I'm surprised that it's come out, all of a sudden like this. But there you are. So that's my answer.
We have a question from one of our two musicians, Matthias.
Okay, Matthias. Yeah, go on then.
All right. Hi, Matthias. I've started a startup, Livid it's called, and we're trying to get to do it better compared to Richard Branson 20 years ago. Meaning, I'm not trying to be the next Branson. Just it's about selling cars direct. But that's not my question. The question is about. I assume you live in London, right?
Mm-hmm. No, I live in the countryside near Oxford.
Oh, okay. But you're aware of the London travel situation, and they're trying to. I'm being really strict and trying to ban individual traffic out of the city, and it probably expands. And what I was wondering is how is the average Mr. and Mrs. Smith affected, and what sort of reaction does it have on the average population? Is there a fear that this no car zone is gonna grow and affect them in their everyday life and commuting?
Yes, absolutely. A lot of people are horrified by it. I would say the majority of people are getting angry that there's all this talk of let's get rid of the car is evil, anyone who drives it is a devil, so on and so forth. But that's our fault. I think, go back to storytelling. You have to explain things to people to help them understand, not make them understand, help them see it for themselves. Little kids are great at convincing you to buy them some sweets. They don't keep saying, buy me some sweets, buy me some sweets. They'll say things like, do you like sweets? What's your favorite sweet? They're very clever at kind of manipulating you one way round to this. And I think the industry, both for EVs and for car clubs and for all these other things, we've just not been very good at it. And I'd even jump into the whole thing of climate change. And very quickly, the reason why I think the general public all around the world, but certainly the Western world, don't understand climate change. They don't, not really. Otherwise, they change what they do. Is because we're disconnected from nature. If you go back to your great-great-grandparents, they were connected to nature because that's the work they did, Matthias. They worked on the land, so they were connected to it. The modern world, most of us are disconnected to it. So when it comes to the stories of climate change, we don't really understand it because it's not the world we're connected to. Same for mining, but I don't want to go off on a tangent. But to answer your question, I think this stuff is inevitable. I think if you really look at the scope and scale of what we could achieve as humanity, this stuff is kind of niche stuff, quite frankly. If you look at the where we could go to as human beings in regard to how the world works, we're just still scratching the surface. It's pretty. On the one hand, if you look at really where we are, it's pathetic. We haven't really advanced as a species in terms of being cooperative enough. We still treat half of the world's population as inferior. That's women. There is so much more we need to do. So therefore, I think things like owning cars versus using cars, that stuff, come on, we've really got to present that better, articulate it better, and get on with making it, an improved way of things. Owning cars is a bit mad, really. The more you think about it, but it's only mad if there isn't an alternative that makes sense. It's like everything that's ever changed. People will only adopt change if it's better than what they've got today. But explaining that and presenting that in the right way and it being real, not just a kind of story, that's the secret, I think. I don't know if that makes sense, Matthias. And good luck with what you're doing, by the way.
No, absolutely. That does make sense, and I'd love to see it put in a broader picture. So yeah.
Any more questions? Just raise your voice. I got one, Roger. You're like a truffle pig, hunting for new ideas, new concepts. You're usually
I've never been called a truffle pig ever. I love it. Yeah.
We have some truffles in Italy, but no, really, if you look at like 3 hidden champions, not the obvious one.
Yeah.
We have our suppliers. I have the thesis. William Lee would not have this great car without our suppliers. Elon, the same thing. But just maybe 3 companies you really are inspired and you think they can help us solve these challenges. And I know, travel a lot, you meet them, you really go to the places. Just share 3 secrets with us.
Okay, I would say there's a company in America called Fermata Energy, they are deeply involved in bidirectional charging. They are hugely focused on making the battery an asset and all that stuff. So that would be one. I'm coming to Germany actually on Monday. I'm coming to the opening of Li-Cycle's facility just outside Berlin. And I think that's hugely important. Urban mining, being able to not waste stuff, get into the whole circularity, the whole circular economy stuff. And then I go back to the company I did mention earlier. And by the way, I have no association with any of these companies. I'm not an investor. I don't have anything. So it's just observation. Our Next Energy, the ambition of that company in America is very focused on Africa. It's focused on being able to give people, at the mass adoption level, the ability to collect solar energy, store it, and have that reliable connection to power for all the things they want to do. Everything about what they want to do. And I really think that if you look at the change of the world, what's going on with demographics and growing population, Africa, 5 of the biggest and fastest growing countries in terms of population are in Africa. It's got the youngest population demographic wise in many ways. So I like what they're doing. So yeah, I'd say those 3 companies. Yeah.
Before I pass on to Claudia, what's urban mining? Just give me one step deeper. What is it? Vertical farming or is it?
No. It's only a phrase I've been familiar with for a short while, so sorry, I should have mentioned it. It basically means mining from recycling. It basically means what's in the urban environment, that's what we mine. We get it from recycling things. And some things we can recycle over and over and over again. There is a huge amount of electronic waste at the moment that just is wasted. So finding a practical way in which that can be recycled as a business and recycled, for all the right reasons, that's urban mining. So it's all the stuff around us. It's everything in the urban environment that gets reused rather than dug up out the ground.
Claudia.
Hi, Roger. Thank you very much. So I have a question regarding your LinkedIn appearance, and would be interesting learning more about your journey. How did it come? How you actually create new content, create new ideas, and keep engaged with your community, because this was also a topic in our course, and I think you're a big role model on this. So maybe you can give us some special personal tips how your journey is going on LinkedIn.
Well, thank you very much for saying those nice things. But honestly and truthfully, I don't. Okay, this is one of the things I do. I don't think I've got a big audience. I always have in my head I've got one person. I often, when I write, say you, and I put it in YOU capital letters. I'm not like addressing, oh, hello, the audience, this whatever number it is. Always imagine you're talking to one person, not a crowd. Because mostly that's exactly what you're doing. Someone is on their phone, looking on their phone, or they're looking at their computer, and it's a very personal interaction. But if I refer to you as the crowd or the audience, it's not personal. So that's one thing for sure. The second thing is, if you do progress and you get a bit of an audience, work very hard to not let it go to your head. It's no big deal. You know, there are plenty of other people who do far more important things than I do. You know, a doctor, a nurse, all those sort of things. It's just a communication device. And yes, you can get access to a lot of people, and that's nice. It's hard work. If your kind of ambition is to build an audience and to have that kind of voice, in a way, it kind of shouldn't be. It should almost happen by accident. But how it's happened for me is because I'm quite almost like a bit of a, well, it's sort of slightly weird in a way. I kind of look at it too much. I'm like a young person that's over focused on social media. I shouldn't do it too much, but it's become a habit. But it's become a habit that's worked for me because the other thing I don't do paid content. I'm not an influencer. I am a storyteller. That's why I make the distinction. I don't do paid content. If people said, can we have a discussion? This is what we do. You know, we'll pay you this amount of money and then we'll go on LinkedIn. I don't do that. I make money by getting paid to show off on a stage. That's nice. That's the thing I like best. I get paid to do some consultancy work for people. And on occasion, I found quite large amounts of money for people as investment, and then you get a commission for doing that, and that can help a lot. And the other thing, when you go on LinkedIn, don't just think about yourself. I go on and look at the news. I look at what other people are doing first, and I read stuff and I'll comment on it. And I try not to make any distinction between someone who's got a lot of followers and someone who hasn't. And I've got a few people. There's a guy called Ron Usher. He's a bus driver. And Ron kindly comments quite a lot on my things. And I think Ron is important in my mind as Ola Kalenius. He's someone on LinkedIn that interacts with me. In fact, Ola doesn't interact with me as much as Ron. So actually, in my mind, Ron's more important than Ola. And I just look, it's like anything really. The majority of things that work well are born out of hard work. What's that? Who said this? I think 99% perspiration, 1% inspiration. I probably have an audience because I post a lot. That's one thing. And I always read something before I post it and then put a little bit of context in it. Don't do many hashtags at the bottom, only do 4, don't do that thing where you put loads of people's names, like you go through about 20 people's names, almost like saying, read this, you must read this, please read this. I'm desperate for you to read. Don't do that. And the other, honestly, the other thing is if on occasion, it's not a particularly busy post. A lot of people don't read it. Never mind. It's like, get over it. People have been busy doing something else. They've got better things to do with their time than read your stuff. That's how I feel. So yeah, I try and have a bit of, and I feel bad saying it because I shouldn't say it, but have a bit of humility. It's like we're all important as each other. It's like no one's bloody special. Well, they are, but to each other, in families and things. So yeah, they would be my thoughts. I hope that helps, Claudia.
Thanks for sharing. This reminds us about our discussion about real life experiences, away from this digital bubble, how this works. And that's why it was for me so important to meet you in person. Any more questions from your side? I got one. I asked you for homework for prepare for our session, and you read the Walter Isaacson biography of Elon Musk.
Yeah.
With a little bit. You had some references even to the Rubik's Cube.
Yeah.
In German, I need to check, but you're ahead. So what were your insights, or maybe even surprising, not just the stories about his...
Well, a couple of things. There's no way I want to work for Elon Musk because I value my private life, my family life too much, and he would destroy it. he's kind of unique, but he's like Steve Jobs. He's so focused on the mission, everything else doesn't count, including other people. So he's quite brutal. The algorithm, he has an algorithm, and his algorithm for dealing with things, I can't remember it off the top of my head, but it goes through there like gateways to get to a point of something. And there's a bit in the book where some of the people that are working with him, they're at an event or at a meeting or something, and Elon starts to rip into something, and a few of the execs look at each other and they just go, they just mouth the word algorithm. They know what he's about to do. And he's an extraordinary human being. He's not an alien, because I thought he was for a while. I thought he must be. But he's a mildly damaged human. He had a bad time growing up. He was bullied a lot because he was different. And like anybody that's had a hard time when they were younger, and often people are successful because of bad things. They need to prove something. And I think what you see writ large with Elon Musk is that he has this absolute need for affirmation, for people to say you're worth it. You're worthy. You're not a waster. You're not useless. You're not whatever. And I think we all have a bit of that inside us. It's a bit like when you're a child. You want your mum or dad to say nice things about you, to be kind. And then when we get older, it's the same thing. But yeah, I think the book is really very revealing and has a lot of business tips in it. I'm going through it thinking, making little notes, like I said, thinking, right, I'm definitely going to do that. A couple of references to other people and other books, definitely going to read those. By the way, in terms of tackling climate change, this is a very good thing. It's called Drawdown, Project Drawdown.
Okay. And
it's basically the suggestion of that carbon in the air comes from multiple sources, not just cars, obviously. And this book is peer-reviewed scientific analysis of how much carbon, from where, and how do we get there? How do we get it out again? So that's a very good book. But yeah, being analytical, looking at first principles. Some of that stuff has been revealed about Musk before, but there are some fresh and new stuff in there, and it goes through the kind of journey. And just as a final thought, the bit that personally I've enjoyed reading is when it gets to the moment in 2007 and 8, which is when I started my electric vehicle journey, just thinking of what was going on along that way. Oh, and by the way, I bumped into JB Straubel at the FT Future of the Car Summit last year, I think it was. Yeah, it was. And we were talking, and I admire him hugely. He's a huge part of Tesla's success, no doubt at all. Now runs Redwood Materials. And he said to me, well, what do you do? What have you done? And I told him this and that. And I mentioned Modec. And he said, oh, Modec, we were thinking of buying Modec. Oh my God, I nearly fell over. He said, 2009, I think he said it was. But he said, we were in such a mess ourselves, and Elon had, the whole thing going on with SpaceX. And Tesla was a huge challenge, and all the rest of this stuff. He said that we just didn't have the bandwidth to get on with it. But we knew what you were doing. We liked your vehicle, and we thought it was cool. Honestly, I nearly cried. I was very emotional, because when that company failed, I felt sad, but I also felt guilty as a manager, as a director of the company, and I was the sales director, despite everything that was in the background that didn't make it easy. Yeah, I felt personally that I'd failed, and failed a lot of people, especially the people that worked, young people that worked in on the production line, who had mortgages and young kids. I felt terrible. So to hear this man say they were thinking of buying that company, like, oh my God, it's amazing.
Thanks, Roger. Elon for sure kicked off the change, the transformation, besides other aspects. And our we call it a movement. we call it it's a fitness program for the mobility revolution. You know, we have now 128 alumni soon, more to come, you know, and a great crowd. So out of your experience, your advice for really now changing this industry, being at the tipping point. You mentioned before, you know, that this quote from the German economic guy. So I'm convinced that we are now in a very decisive time, you know, and that it's us with the next generation to now really get this transformation done. What would be your final advice to us as a group, as individuals?
Again, not mine, from someone else.
Yeah.
The guy that ran a couple of the Formula One teams in Brackley, where I live, he has an acronym called TEAM. Together, everyone achieves more. Ross Brawn. He was explaining this to my son and all the sixth formers in school, because it was the local school to the business he was running. And he said, you will all fail in life if you try to do it on your own, but you could be successful, but only when you collaborate, work as a team. So I think that the final thing I'd say is collaboration is the key in all of this. It's the key in life. It's the key in our personal lives. Having, you know, a little circle of friends, collaborating with people, and maybe changing that around to keep it fresh as well is quite good. But for business, you know, collaboration, joining forces, looking at how you can work together. I tell you one thing I learned for sure: the Chinese are bloody brilliant at this. You know, the connection of entrepreneurs with the government and many other people is a big aspect of how they've gone on this big journey. They've collaborated like no one else. We need to do much more of that here in Europe and elsewhere. We have to, you know, think about who we are as businesses, our tier ones, you know, our tier twos. We need to look at how to blend collaboration more than just competing all the time, because all you're doing is this: it's banging and banging and banging rather than that. You know, that's what we need to do. So that, going back to your earlier question, that's another thing we got to get better at is real collaboration, not just saying it.
Thanks, Roger, putting our collaboration on the next level, including this great group. We had a lot of brain food. Our strength is we have this brain food session, but then also we have soul food, you know. And
yeah.
You know, you don't get any salary from me, but you get invited. So you can choose. We go to Davos. We have the second Mobility Economic Forum, very humble. So we go skiing and party. We have the next Oktoberfest. And I'm really looking forward that you meet this crowd in person. So we definitely see you latest in 24. We too see us in Italy. Thanks a lot for this special hour, and yeah, good health, good luck for you and your family and your mission.
Ja, und vielen Dank für alles, und entschuldigen Sie, mein Deutsch ist nicht gern, aber yeah, sorry. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate everybody listening. Thank you. Dankeschön.
Okay, wir treffen uns um 3:30. Wir haben eine halbe Stunde Pause und haben dann den Christian Böllhoff, der nochmal, sage ich mal, von der globalen Sichtweise auf unsere Heimatregion geht. Bitte seid kurz vorher da um 15:30 Uhr. Bis gleich.